A fine drizzle fell over the damp streets of Seattle, turning rooftops and traffic lights into gray mirrors. Isabela crossed Pine Street with books pressed to her chest, her scarf wrapped around her neck 3 times. Her worn-out sneakers splashed water as she stepped around puddles. She wasn't in a hurry, but she also had no time to waste. It was just another ordinary day, until it wasn't. The city seemed wrapped in an elegant silence, broken only by soft honking and the distant creak of a Ferris wheel at the pier. Isabela loved that contrast, the rush of people and the slow rhythm of the sea that surrounded Seattle. Working at a small independent bookstore in Capitol Hill didn't pay much, but it gave her many worlds. She read everything she could between cups of coffee. Her world was made of paper, courage, and promises no one had made, but fate doesn't. Respect routines. As she turned the corner on Broadway Avenue, she collided hard with someone. Her books fell to the wet ground along with the leather folder he had been carrying. "I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, quickly crouching down to rescue her treasures. The man, dressed in a dark suit and wearing a tense expression, knelt at the same time. His eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a quiet presence that seemed to fill the space around him. His eyes were a stormy gray blue, like cold mornings over Lake Union. There was something about the way he furrowed his brow, as if all was at war with his thoughts. Isabela shivered, and it wasn't from the rain. This wasn't just a random collision. "Are you okay?" she asked, trying not to stare. He hesitated, wiping his wet hands on the pockets of his elegant overcoat. "Yeah, it was my fault," he said in a low, almost hoarse voice, like someone who wasn't used to speaking much. She watched him carefully. There was something deeply lonely about this man, and yet a subtle gentleness in every one of his gestures. The rain intensified, forcing them to dash toward the entrance of a nearby cafe. The red awning fluttered in the wind, and the scent of fresh coffee wafted through the doors. "Do you want to go in?" she offered, nodding inside with her chin. He glanced at his watch as if trying to remember whether he had time for a break. "Just for a minute," he conceded. Inside, the warmth was welcoming. Isabela shook the moisture from her hair as he removed his coat with restrained movements. They sat at a table by the window where they could watch the fog roll over passing cars. "I don't usually do this," he said. "Go into cafes with strangers." She smiled faintly. "Good thing today isn't a usual day." "My name's Isabela," she said, extending her hand. He paused for a second. "Nathan," he replied, shaking her hand firmly with a hint of discomfort. "Do you work around here?" he asked, eyes averted. "At Evergreen Bookstore, 2 blocks from here," she said proudly. "I love books." "What about you?" "Financial." "Consultant," he said, almost apologetically. "Not very exciting." Isabela smiled again, now more curious. "Maybe you're just in the wrong chapter of your story," she offered. He looked up at her, surprised. For the first time, the corner of his lip curved upward, as if he hadn't heard words like that in a long time. The waiter brought 2 coffees, hers with oat milk, his black and strong. The conversation didn't flow easily. It was as if Nathan had forgotten how to connect with someone. But with each sentence from Isabela, he allowed himself to become a little more present. She spoke about the bookstore, her mother who still sewed custom dresses, and her rainy night readings of Austen. Nathan, on the other hand, spoke little. But when he did, fragments of a life marked by silence and loss emerged. He mentioned a brother he hadn't seen in years, a childhood in Boston, and a certain weariness in his eyes that had nothing to do with work. Isabela didn't ask too many, questions, she understood the delicacy of dealing with invisible wounds. An hour later, the coffee had gone cold, but neither of them had noticed. The cafe began to empty, and the rain outside turned back into a drizzle. Nathan looked at his watch again as if waking from a dream. "I have to go," he said with a trace of reluctance. This was unexpectedly good. She nodded, feeling that the moment had been more than it seemed. He hesitated before leaving. "Will you be at the bookstore tomorrow?" he asked, not quite meeting her eyes. "I will," and that was enough. He nodded and walked away, disappearing beneath Seattle's gray sky. Isabela remained there, with the strange feeling that a stranger had just touched something deeply intimate inside her. On her way home, she replayed the meeting like a memorable passage from a book. There was something unreal about Nathan, as if he were made of another substance, colder, denser, more painful. And yet, something incredibly human lingered in him, an absence screaming for presence. Isabela's simple apartment, with a partial view of the city skyline, felt quieter than usual. As she laid her damp books out to dry, she thought about how some encounters seem hand-stitched by fate. Would he come back? She wasn't the type to wait for a prince, but Nathan didn't seem like a prince. He seemed like a mystery. The next morning, the sky was clear, though the air still carried the humidity from the night before. Isabela wore her favorite sweater and brought along a book she had mentioned during their talk, Sense and Sensibility. She arrived at the bookstore earlier than usual, organizing everything with extra care. Each time the door opened, her heart raced. But Nathan didn't show. The day went by, and his absence weighed heavier than she expected. Maybe it really had been just a fleeting encounter, a beautiful coincidence like those unfinished poems. That night, wrapped in a blanket on the porch with a mug of tea, she tried not to think too much, but it was hard when his eyes still danced in her mind. Meanwhile, Nathan drove through the streets of Queen Anne, the radio off, his thoughts spiraling. He wasn't used to letting people past his walls, and yet there was something about Isabela that defied logic. She hadn't asked for anything. She had simply listened with eyes that didn't judge, only understood. He stopped at a bridge. Over the canal, rolled down the window, took in the cold air. Part of him wanted to forget that meeting. The other part wanted to relive it. But he wasn't sure he deserved that kind of simplicity. Isabela was light, and he had long grown used to the shadows. And as Seattle moved on in its gray and enchanting rhythm, two souls, different as the neighborhoods of the city, carried a shared memory, a meeting, a coffee, and a silence between them that felt like the beginning of something impossible or inevitable. The rain had returned to Seattle, covering the sidewalks with a cold, glistening sheen. Isabela arranged books on the shelves, as if trying to organize her thoughts. Since the encounter with Nathan, something inside her felt out of place. It was as if she had opened the door to a hidden room in her heart, and now, even in silence, she waited for someone who might never return. The morning after their meeting, she made 2 cups of coffee. One sat cooling on the counter while she absent-mindedly read an old poem. Every now and then, she glanced at the door, hoping to hear the bell chime, but the door stayed closed, and the world remained indifferent to her longing. Isabela wasn't one to wait for anyone, but something about that man had stirred her. Meanwhile, Nathan stared at the horizon from the glass terrace of his high-rise. The city moved on, but everything inside him felt suspended. He thought of Isabela more than he cared to admit, like a persistent echo. She was unlike anyone he knew, sincere, calm, real, and he He didn't know how to deal with people who didn't wear masks. Since the accident that changed his life, Nathan had played an impenetrable role, a respected executive, cold, calculating, admired by many, known by none. He had learned to avoid attachments, shielding himself from unexpected affection. But Isabela had appeared uninvited, with curious eyes and disarming warmth, and it unsettled him more than he was willing to confess. 2 days later, he parked in front of Evergreen Books. He sat in the car for a few minutes, staring at the storefront, undecided. It seemed foolish to go in again, but something pulled him there. When he finally opened the door, the bell chimed like a heartbeat. Isabela looked up, and her smile made everything seem easier. "I thought you disappeared," she said without accusation. "So did I," he replied, removing his wet coat. The scent of coffee and old paper filled the air with comfort. He walked between the shelves like a man searching for shelter. "I need something new to read," he said, masking his true reason. She handed him a book of modern poetry. "Trust me," she said, offering the navy blue volume. He took the book with slight hesitation, as if it were too delicate to touch. "I tend to avoid things that make me feel," he confessed. "Maybe that's exactly why you need them," she answered, without pause. They sat at the back table, where filtered sunlight poured through the window. She read aloud in a quiet voice, and he listened without rushing. The words struck him in unexpected ways, like tiny truths. He couldn't tell what moved him more, the verses or the way she spoke them. It felt as if every word had been chosen to touch a hidden wound. After nearly an hour, the silence between them was comforting. Nathan sipped his coffee slowly, his eyes fixed on the cup. "Have you always had this way of getting into people?" he asked sincerely. Isabela laughed softly, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I just listen. Almost no one really listens." In the following days, Nathan came back twice more. He never warned her, and she never asked why. He moved closer each time, always with a book in hand and tired eyes. The bookstore, with its walls lined in stories, had become a safe place, and she, a steady presence he didn't yet know how to name. One Saturday after closing time, Isabela was locking up when she saw him crossing the street. They exchanged glances for a few seconds before he said, "Want to grab a coffee somewhere else?" She nodded with a faint smile, surprised by the invitation. They walked together to a cafe on the corner, cold wind brushing their faces. Inside, the warmth and soft music wrapped around them like an unlikely refuge. They sat by the window, watching the gray city outside. "Seattle is beautiful when it rains," she said. "Or maybe you just see beauty where others don't," he replied thoughtfully. Isabela looked at him tenderly, trying to understand this guarded man. "You don't smile much, you know?" Nathan hesitated, then stared out the window for a long moment. "I lost the habit," he murmured, almost in a whisper. She didn't ask why. She knew some answers reveal themselves in time, but in that instant, every part of her wanted to embrace him, even without understanding, even without guarantees. On the way back, he walked her to the bookstore so she could get her car. They walked in silence, but it wasn't an empty silence. Something was growing between them, still shapeless, but alive. At the farewell, he looked at her as if wanting to say something, but couldn't. "Thanks for the coffee," she said, and he simply nodded with a faint smile. In the following days, Isabela found herself waiting more eagerly for his visits. She replayed their conversations, reading between the lines. Nathan had entered her life unexpectedly, and she didn't like surprises, yet somehow she had become dependent on this human mystery, as if he were a book she needed to finish reading. Nathan, in turn, avoided naming what he felt. He remained precise, impeccable, alone by choice. But the truth was, he missed her voice, her gentle questions, the way she looked at him without rushing. And for the first time, he wasn't sure he wanted to keep running. One night, he opened a drawer in his office and took out an old photo. His mother and sister smiled before a sunlit landscape. He was a different man in that picture, light, carefree, happy. Now that version of himself felt as distant as childhood. But Isabela had sparked something he thought had long gone out. She doesn't know who I really am, he thought, guilt rising in his chest. But at the same time, he wished to be seen the way she saw him, without burdens, without history, only for who he was right now. Maybe the past couldn't be undone, but maybe there was still a way to begin again. That evening, as she closed the bookstore, Isabela found a flower pressed inside a book. It was a lavender, delicate and silent, marked with a note. Sometimes words aren't enough. Thank you for letting me stay. She read the message more than once. Eyes misty, Nathan was beginning to say things, even when he said nothing at all. Seattle remained gray, damp, and noisy. But inside the small bookstore on Broadway, two worlds had begun to touch. Still, shy, still filled with fear, but in motion. Isabela turned off the store lights and smiled in the dark. The man who never smiled was slowly learning to live again. The following days brought a strange rhythm to Nathan's routine. Even with the intense demands of work, his mind kept drifting back to the bookstore. Isabela appeared in his thoughts like a sweet, restless echo. He tried not to think of her, but everything around him seemed to remind him: the words she spoke, the silences she offered, the way she looked at him without rushing. Sometimes he picked up his phone and typed messages he never sent. The fear of getting closer than he should still held him back. There was a gap between wanting to be near and feeling like he deserved it. Nathan lived with ghosts he avoided naming, and Isabela, with her kindness, threatened to open doors sealed for years. At the end of a quiet Wednesday, he parked in front of the bookstore. He watched the lights inside, the reflection of the sign on the wet sidewalk. She was inside, arranging books with her hair tied up carelessly. For a moment, Nathan almost got out of the car, but instead he turned the engine back on and left without being seen. Isabela felt his absence like noticing a missing line in a story. She didn't mention it to anyone, but waited at every ring of the bell. She was falling in love, though afraid to admit it, and it hurt in a new way, soft and constant, like a story she longed to keep reading, but that refused to turn the page. 3 days later, he showed up, tired eyes and a closed-off expression. "You disappeared," she said, trying to keep her tone light. "I had things to take care of," he replied vaguely. Isabela didn't press, but something in her knew there was more behind it. Still, she offered the same smile that made it easier for him to breathe. They sat together at the small table in the corner. She made tea for them both and brought over a book of poetry. Nathan held the cup for a few moments before saying, "There's something I need to tell you, but I don't know how." "Start where it hurts the least," she replied gently. He pulled a yellowed envelope from his pocket, its edges worn. Inside was an old photo, A smiling woman, a young girl beside her. My mother and my sister. They died 10 years ago. Isabela felt the air shift as if everything had been suspended. Nathan stared at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. It was an accident. I was driving and looked at my phone. His voice broke, as though the confession still tore him apart. 2 seconds, that's all it took, and I lost them both. Isabela reached for his hand, saying nothing. Sometimes silence is the most precise response one can give. Since then, I stopped allowing myself anything good, he continued. It's not punishment, it's just how I keep breathing. She squeezed his hand, steady and present. Nathan, living with guilt isn't the same as living with memory. You can remember them without punishing yourself forever. He looked at her for the first time since he began speaking. There were tears in his eyes, but also a sense of relief. You're not judging me? No, because I know you do that every single day. Isabela hugged him softly, like someone holding a cracked vase with care. That night he walked her to the bus stop. They stood under the awning of a closed shop, the city breathing slowly around them. I've never told anyone, he said. Then now it's not just yours anymore, she replied with a small smile, and in that moment he felt there was space inside him for something new. When he got home, Nathan turned on the lights of his modern, quiet loft, but for the first time, the silence didn't crush him. He picked up a notebook and wrote instinctively. Today, someone listened without running away. He tucked the notebook into a drawer and slept dreamlessly for the first time in years. Isabela walked home with slow steps. She felt the weight of what she'd heard, but also the lightness of being trusted with truth. She knew what it meant when someone showed their scars. It was a silent request to stay, and she was willing to stay. In the days that followed, Nathan came often. He didn't talk much about his feelings, but his gestures changed. He brought coffee, asked about her favorite authors, or just sat in silence. She let him be. No pressure, no labels, and that healed him in small, invisible steps. One Saturday, she invited him to visit a hidden used bookstore in Fremont. He accepted, a bit hesitant, and spent the afternoon among dusty books and shy laughter. Isabela picked out an old book of love letters and handed it to him. You don't have to read it now, but maybe someday it will make sense. Nathan tucked the book away gently, like receiving something sacred. On the way back, they crossed the Fremont Bridge. The sun pierced through the clouds and bathed the water in gold. You scare me, he said, not looking at her. Why? Because you make me want to believe again. Isabela didn't answer. She just smiled with her eyes. The car rolled on in silence, but their hearts were loud. Nathan didn't know where this would lead, but for the first time, he didn't want to run. He wanted to see what came next. That night, he read one of the letters from the book. It was simple, beautiful, honest, and he wondered if he would ever be brave enough to write something like that. Maybe yes. Maybe it was still too soon, but now at least he was thinking about the possibility. Isabela was arranging the bookstore window display when she found a hidden envelope. Inside was a note in Nathan's handwriting. Thank you for being what I didn't know I needed. She held the paper in trembling hands, her eyes welling up. The emotion came strong, but it wasn't pain, it was hope. And so, through words spoken and unspoken, they kept drawing closer, like leaves guided by the same breeze, not knowing where they'd land. Seattle remained cloudy, but there was light in the spaces between the lines they were writing. It wasn't love declared yet, but it was affection in the making, and sometimes that was already a beginning. The days in Seattle continued wrapped in fine drizzle. and the autumn breeze, the bookstore stayed warm, not just from the old heaters, but from presents. Nathan now came by almost daily, always with a book under his arm. He sat at the same table, ordered the same tea, but his gaze had changed. He was no longer the man avoiding the world, but someone slowly allowing it to touch him. Isabela noticed the changes in subtle gestures, the way he leaned his shoulder against the shelf, or how his voice grew lighter. The smile that had once been shy now appeared more often, though still discreet. Between them, there were no promises or urgency, just time, and in that time their feeling grew with silent, steady roots. One afternoon, she found him organizing titles by genre with adorable focus. "Since when do you know the difference between historical romance and psychological drama?" "Since you started teaching me without realizing it," he replied. She laughed, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. Nathan, without thinking, reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was light, almost imperceptible, but filled with something new. Isabela felt her heart beat in the soothed rhythm of a silent confession. Nathan slowly withdrew his hand like someone waking from a dream. "Sorry, You don't need to apologize," she whispered, never looking away from him. From that day on, the silences between them grew more intense. They were silences that spoke loudly, that said everything without needing words. Hands brushed by accident. Glances lingered a little longer. Goodbyes lasted more, and goodnights became sweeter. Love was being born, not like a storm, but like a breeze. On a sunny Sunday, Isabela took him to a hidden viewpoint in Queen Anne. From up there, Seattle looked like a puzzle of lights and colorful rooftops. Nathan stayed silent for long minutes, just watching. "It's beautiful," he said, but he was looking at her. Isabela smiled, trying not to fall apart inside. They sat on the grass, side by side, their knees almost touching. "Are you afraid of falling in love, Nathan?" "No." "I'm afraid of what I might ruin if it happens." She didn't reply right away, just looked up at the sky. Maybe love doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be true. Her words stayed with him in the days that followed. They echoed in his mind during meetings, while driving, or before falling asleep. Nathan wasn't used to feeling, much less accepting feelings, but now every part of him screamed for her presence. And he was beginning to understand he didn't have to run anymore. Isabela felt the love growing too, like roots beneath her skin. It was different from anything she had ever lived. Calm, respectful, patient. Nathan didn't invade. He stayed. And that disarmed her completely. She didn't have to protect herself all the time. For the first time, she could simply exist. On a cold night, he waited for her at the bookstore door with a flower in hand. "For you," he said, offering a yellow tulip. "Why?" "Because today I just wanted to thank you for existing." She took the flower, moved, and he smiled, a smile that said everything. They walked together to the cafe where they had first met. They sat at the same table, as if time had come. Full circle. "Remember when you said you didn't usually go into cafes with strangers?" "I do, and I remember how you made that different." "You still have time to get to know me," she said, eyes sparkling. He held her hand across the table. For the first time, without hesitation, their fingers intertwined like pieces that had always fit. The world around them faded, as if only the two of them existed in that moment. "I want to try," he said, "even if I'm scared." "Then try with me," she replied, smiling with her whole heart. The relationship bloomed like a garden after winter. There were spontaneous laughs, deep conversations, comfortable silences. They shared books, coffee, walks around the city, memories, and plans. Nathan revealed more of himself each day and rediscovered himself through her reflection. Isabela, in turn, felt truly seen for the first time, but not everything was easy. Nathan still had moments of withdrawal, of quiet guilt. Sometimes he would distance himself without explaining, lost in dark thoughts. Isabela, with her firm patience, waited for him to return. She knew that healing old wounds isn't a straight line. One night she found him sitting on the bookstore steps. His eyes were red, body hunched, as if carrying the weight of the world. Without a word, she sat beside him and simply held his hand. "Today's the anniversary of their death," he murmured. "Let's remember them with love." "They would do that for you," she replied. He cried there, unashamed, like someone finally surrendering to relief. Isabela embraced him without asking for strength, without expecting anything in return. That night he slept on her couch, his head in her lap. The love between them was no longer a promise. It had become real. And reality, sometimes, is more beautiful than any dream. The next morning, Nathan made breakfast with a smile. "I used to think love was fragile," he said, stirring his mug. "But now I think it's what holds us up when everything shakes." Isabela nodded quietly, watching him with tenderness. He was changing, not for her, but for himself. Isabela jotted down pieces of their story in her old journal. She saved phrases, gestures, and tiny memories like rare jewels she knew loves. Like this don't happen twice, and even if it ever ended, it would still have been worth it for everything it healed. But deep down, she hoped it would last forever. Nathan began making plans, something he hadn't done in years. He talked about trips, moving homes, writing a book, and in all those plans, there was a space carved out for her. He didn't spell it out, but he showed it in every detail. The future was starting to feel less frightening. And so, through sweet words, shared challenges, and quiet silences, the love between them grew strong and real. Seattle remained gray, but their world was lit from within. Two broken hearts had found each other to learn how to love again. And that love, so quiet in the beginning, was now beginning to speak louder. Autumn continued to settle over Seattle, painting the trees in shades of copper and gold. Isabela walked among fallen leaves, feeling the wind play with her scarf. Nathan was waiting for her at the cafe where, months earlier, they had exchanged their first words. Now, it was their favorite place, a refuge from the world outside. But that day, something in his eyes seemed different. "Are you okay?" she asked as she sat down, placing her hand over his. Nathan hesitated before smiling, as if battling something invisible. "Just a rough week," he replied, glancing out the window. She knew that tone. She could tell he was closing off again. But she respected the silence, as she always did. In the days that followed, he disappeared without a word. Messages went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. Isabela felt her chest tighten, the restlessness growing with each morning. She tried to convince herself it was just a phase, an emotional low. But deep down, something screamed. Something was wrong. On a rainy Thursday, she went to the building where he worked. She left a note at the front desk. "Whatever it is, don't run alone. Ava, I." She returned home with a heavy heart, eyes misty under the gray sky. She knew that loving Nathan also meant accepting his darkness, but that didn't make the pain of his absence any easier. The next day, she got a call from an unknown number. "Are you Isabela? We need you to come to Harborview Hospital." Her heart stopped for a moment. The voice on the other end was steady but restrained. He was in an accident. He's conscious but confused. Isabela ran through the wet streets as if the ground were on fire. Siren sounds echoed in her mind. Along with all the terrifying possibilities, she arrived at the hospital, soaked and wide-eyed. At reception, they told her Nathan was in the neurology unit. She climbed the stairs like someone fighting against a storm. When she entered the room, he was lying still, pale, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Nathan?" she said, her voice trembling. He slowly turned his head as if trying to make sense of things. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" The question hit like a punch to the chest. The doctor explained the diagnosis: partial post-traumatic amnesia. Nathan remembered his childhood, his career, but not her. The last few weeks were blank, like pages torn from a book. "This is common in mild brain trauma," the doctor said. "With time, some memories may return." Isabela sat in the chair beside his bed, holding back tears. He looked at her curiously, as if trying to guess her story. "You seemed relieved to see me," he said with a half-smile. "You're important to me," she answered, choosing not to hide what she felt. "You just don't remember that yet." In the days that followed, she visited him every day, even without being recognized. She brought books they had once read together, told stories that belonged to both of them. Nathan listened attentively, captivated by her voice, even if he didn't understand it all. "You read like someone who loves what she says," he once said. "Maybe because I love the one who used to listen," she thought, but didn't say. She watched him laugh at passages he already knew, as if for the first time. Every gesture, every word from him felt like reliving a forgotten chapter. But it was also painful, like watching your own heart walk by without recognizing you. She never complained, never pressured. She simply stayed, present, steady, as true love always does. One afternoon he asked if they had been close. "More than close," she replied with a melancholy smile. "We were two lonely people learning to walk together." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like something I'd want to remember." Time in the hospital felt distorted. Long days, endless nights, hopes hanging by a thread. But Isabela believed, not out of illusion, but by choice. Love also means waiting. Love means staying when the other is lost, and she was willing to stay. On a Saturday morning, she brought the book of old letters he had once loved. She read aloud, voice shaking but steady. When she finished, he closed his eyes as if something stirred within. "That letter. It feels familiar," he whispered, and Isabela's heart raced. The next day, he asked her to tell him how they had met. She told it all in detail: the rain, the scattered books, the quiet cafe. Nathan smiled at parts, furrowed his brow at others, and, Have you always been like this?" "Like what?" she asked, surprised. "So, alive. It's like you feel the world in your own unique way." She laughed softly, lowering her gaze. "Maybe it's just a survival mechanism. Or maybe that's exactly why I fell in love with you," he murmured, then quickly added, "Sorry, I don't know why I said that." Isabela left the room that day with trembling hands. Something in him was awakening, even if slowly. She knew the heart remembers what the mind forgets, and real love leaves invisible marks that even amnesia can't erase. It was just a matter of time. One night, when she arrived at the hospital, she found him standing, looking out the window. He turned, and his eyes met hers with new clarity. "I dreamed about you last night," he said. "We were walking hand in hand down a street covered in fallen leaves. It was autumn, like now. She stepped closer, heart pounding. "Maybe you're starting to remember," he said softly. "Or maybe—" "You're falling in love all over again," she replied. He smiled, hesitant but sincere. "If that's true, then please teach me how to love you again." And so, in the midst of pain, waiting, and forgotten words, a new kind of love was born between them. Stronger, deeper, because now he chose to know her again, and she was willing to win back the man who was already hers, even without memories. Love had begun again. Autumn gave way to colder breezes, and Seattle sank into shades of gray and orange. In the hospital's rehabilitation wing, Nathan walked the halls with slow steps. It had been 2 weeks since the accident, and though his memory hadn't returned, his body was beginning to recognize the comfort of Isabela's presence. She had become his anchor, even if he didn't know how or why. Isabela kept the same ritual every day. She arrived with a book and a smile. She read to him, shared both real and fictional stories, spoke of the world outside. Nathan listened to her with a focus he gave no one else. It was as if his soul remembered her, even if his mind couldn't reach that far yet. And deep down, that was enough to keep her steady. "Why are you doing all this for me?" he asked one day, eyes fixed on hers. Isabela smiled tenderly and replied, "Because when you love someone, you stay." Nathan looked down, visibly moved, though unsure how to respond. He couldn't say he felt the same. Not yet. But something inside him had already begun to shift. The doctors had been clear. His memories might never return, but they also said the human heart is more resilient than any diagnosis. Nathan didn't remember the love they had built, but he was rediscovering it step by step. Isabela, with her steady patience and calm smile, guided him without rushing. It was a new beginning, strange, delicate, but full of possibility. One Sunday afternoon, she took him to the hospital garden. The wind stirred the dry leaves, and the sky was covered in soft clouds. Isabela laid out a blanket on the wooden bench and pulled a book from her bag. "Today I want to read something you used to love." And she began to recite a love letter he himself had chosen months earlier. Nathan listened in silence, but his eyes glistened more than usual. At the end of the reading, he took a deep breath and said these words. "They touch me in a strange way, like they're mine. Maybe they are, or maybe you're beginning to create new memories." She held his hand, letting the silence between them speak. Over the following days, they began taking short walks through the hospital courtyard. They talked about music, childhood, and random things that brought them closer. He discovered in her a subtle sense of humor and a gentle way of being. She rediscovered in him a contained sensitivity, now stripped of old masks. And slowly, a new bond began to grow among the ruins of the old one. One day, as they passed the pediatric wing, they stopped to watch a boy drawing. Nathan smiled at the child coloring a balloon with a red crayon. "Did you like to draw when you were a kid?" Isabela asked. "Yes. I used to draw boats," he replied, surprised by the spontaneous memory. She smiled like someone witnessing a seed sprout for the first time. That night, he drew a small boat on a napkin and handed it to her. "I may not remember our past, but I can build something with you now." Isabela held the napkin as if it were made of gold. "That's more than I ever expected," she said, her voice cracking. It was a new beginning, and she was ready to sail it. Soon after, the hospital approved his release with outpatient care. Nathan left with a small suitcase and a quiet will to begin again. Isabela took him to his loft, where he looked around as if seeing it for the first time. "Where did I spend most of my time?" he asked, staring at the cold furniture. "At the bookstore. You felt at home among books and silence." In the following days he returned to evergreen books, the smell of old paper, the bell at the door, the sound of the wood floor beneath his steps. All felt familiar, but what struck him most was her, in her navy blue apron, with that firm sweetness in her eyes. He didn't know the name of the feeling that was growing inside him. Again. But he knew he no longer wanted to live without. One afternoon they found a notebook filled with his old writings, poem fragments, scattered phrases, reflections on love and fear. "You used to write more than you realize," she said, eyes misting. Nathan read every line like rediscovering pieces of the man he used to be, and he decided he wanted to write again, even without remembering how. It all began. They sat together by the bookstore window with a notepad and 2 mugs of tea. He wrote, "Today, I fell in love with someone who was already mine." Isabela read it in silence, holding back tears. It was the first time he had spoken, even unknowingly, about their love. A love reborn, calmer, truer. One night, Nathan invited her to dinner at his loft. He prepared a simple meal with napkins. Clumsily folded, he played soft instrumental music and lit 2 small candles. "I wanted to give you something, even if I'm still putting myself back together. You already give me what matters most. Presents," she said, moved. After dinner, they sat in silence for long minutes. Their hands met on the table, their eyes locked. "Can I kiss you?" he asked softly. Isabela nodded, her heart racing as if it were the first time, and the kiss came, gentle, deep, filled with new and old feelings. That night they slept together for the first time since the accident. But it wasn't about bodies, it was about comfort, a meeting of souls. He held her like someone who didn't remember, but still knew that she was home. She caressed him like someone who had waited a long time and could finally rest. It was love in the process of rebuilding, and that was more than enough. The next morning, Nathan woke up before her and watched her sleep. He felt something strong in his chest, like recognition. He picked up his notebook and wrote, "She is my most beautiful memory." He left the note beside the pillow and went to make coffee. When she woke, she read it and cried in silence, feeling loved once again. Their new beginning wasn't perfect. There were insecurities, silences, shadows still lurking, but there was also daily choice, mutual effort, and a love that persisted. He had begun to remember sensations, scents, touches, and she allowed herself to love the new man growing before her eyes. Friends started noticing the change in Nathan, more frequent smiles, lighter shoulders, brighter eyes. He gradually returned to work, but with different priorities. His free time was spent at the bookstore, walking with her, and all of it was proof that love, even rebuilt, could be even stronger. And so, between new pages and old feelings, Isabela and Nathan kept rebuilding something more beautiful than the original. It was a love born from pain, courage, and the decision to stay. Seattle remained gray, but their world grew more colorful every day, because when the heart learns to love again, it loves even deeper. Seattle mornings had grown colder, but inside the bookstore, warmth still lingered. Nathan spent his mornings there, among coffee cups, notebooks, and Isabela's hands. They still moved carefully, like rebuilding a castle with glass bricks, but the days flowed more gently, and love blossomed in quiet gestures, until, like everything precious, the past came knocking to test its strength. It was an ordinary Monday when she walked in. Tall, blonde hair, neatly styled, confident stride, unwavering expression. "Good afternoon? I'm looking for Nathan Carter," she told the bookstore clerk. Isabela heard the name and turned immediately, feeling a chill run up her spine. The woman walked as if she knew the place, or the man who frequented it. "He's not here at the moment," Isabela said, trying to steady her voice. "And you are—" "Ava, I'm his ex-fiancée," she replied, like someone tossing a stone into a calm lake. Isabela froze for a moment, the world spinning slightly around her. "Oh, I didn't know he was engaged," she murmured. "Ex-fiancé," Ava corrected with an enigmatic smile. "I heard about the accident and the amnesia, thought maybe it was time to talk." Isabela wanted to say something, anything, but her mind felt fogged. Ava handed over a business card and left. With rehearsed elegance, as soon as she was gone, Isabela had to sit down. That night Nathan showed up as usual, with flowers and sweet words. She watched him for several minutes before saying anything. "Ava came by today," she said plainly. Nathan froze for a second, trying to recall. "The name sounds familiar, but it means nothing to me." Isabela nodded, but something inside her twisted. She knew she shouldn't feel jealous of something that no longer existed, but love also brings fears, even irrational ones. "She said she was your fiancé," she continued softly. Nathan sighed, running his hand through his hair. "Maybe she was. I don't remember, but nothing inside me misses her." "And what if you remember?" "Even if I do, I'll still choose to stay right here," he said. She wanted to believe, desperately. But Ava's presence echoed within her. More than the woman, it was what she represented. Days later, Ava reappeared. This time, she found Nathan at the bookstore entrance. He vaguely recognized her as if from an old dream. They spoke outside for 15 minutes. Isabela watched from a distance, heart racing. When he came back in, he noticed her look. "We talked about the past, about what once was, and what does she want now? Maybe to try and rekindle what we had. But I don't want that. I'm here, Isa, with you, by choice." She nodded, but the fears had already sprouted like weeds. That night she wrote in her journal, "Can love survive what it doesn't remember?" Nathan, in turn, wrote in his notebook, "The heart knows, even when the world tries to confuse it." They were both trying, but the doubt had begun to weigh. The following week, Ava came back with an envelope. "Letters you wrote me." "Before all of this," she told Nathan. He took the envelope, puzzled, without opening it. Isabela saw it from afar, but the silence hit the hardest. That night was quiet. Isabela felt the weight of what if heavier than ever. Nathan held her, but she took longer than usual to settle in his arms. "Is something changing between us, he asked. "Yes." "The past knocked on the door, and I don't know how to close it." He held her face gently, eyes steady on hers. "Look at me. I have no memory of that woman, but I have feelings for you. They weren't built on memories. They're about now, about what I'm building with you." She took a deep breath and hugged him tightly, trying to believe again. The next day, Nathan brought the letters to the bookstore and placed them on the counter. "Do you want me to read them?" "I want you to decide," he replied. She stared at the envelope for a few seconds, then handed it back. "You don't need to remember what was. Just live what is." He smiled in relief and kissed her hand gently. The simple gesture returned a piece of her lost peace. But even so, Ava wouldn't give up. The next week she sent flowers, notes, messages, and Nathan, respectful, returned it, all unopened. But her mere presence in their world made Isabela feel threatened, not out of insecurity, but from knowing the power of what once was. And so she began to question herself. If their love was truly strong, why did she feel so fragile? Why did the past still haunt her so much? Nathan noticed her distance. He noticed the long pauses, the avoided gazes, the smile that took longer to return, and he decided to act. On Friday night, he asked her to come to the bookstore after closing. She walked in to find the space decorated with photos, books, and soft candlelight. "This is our place," he said. "Even without remembering the past, I built something with you here, every page, every tea, every glance, and if I have to win you back every day, I will." She couldn't hold back. The tears ran into his arms. "I'm not the man I used to be," he whispered, "but I'm the man who chooses to love you now." She held him tight, feeling her heart settle back into place. Ava may have been the past, but here she was the present, and the present was what truly mattered. That night, Seattle slept under a sky heavy with clouds, but inside the bookstore there was only light, warmth, and new beginnings. Yes, the past had knocked on the door, but their love had opened it, looked it in the eyes, and closed it firmly, knowing it no longer belonged. The city awoke wrapped in fog, as if Seattle itself wanted to hold on to time a little longer. Inside the bookstore, the scent of fresh coffee blended with the sound of turning pages. Nathan had arrived early, helping Isabela organize the shelves as if that place were his home. The past few days had been lighter, but also filled with silence. Both knew something was approaching, something that would demand a final choice. The pressure of Ava's presence had begun to dissolve, but it left marks. Isabela tried not to feel threatened, but the doubt still echoed in her chest. Nathan, meanwhile, felt torn between what he couldn't remember and what he was living. It was like trying to walk with one foot in the past and the other in the present. But he knew the time to choose had come. That morning, he received an unexpected call, an invitation for a business trip to New York, a week away. It would be his first time absent since the accident. Isabela listened in silence, hiding the sting in her chest. "Do you think you should go?" she asked, trying to sound neutral. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "Part of me feels I need to breathe away from here. But another part is afraid of losing you if I go." Isabela smiled softly. "If I lose you, let it not be because I didn't let you go." And with that, she let him leave, even with a heavy heart. Nathan left the next day. In his bag he carried a blank notebook and the book of letters he'd never read. During the flight, he looked out the window, thinking about how much had changed in so little time. Isabela had won him over again, without asking for anything in return, and he needed to decide what to do with all of that. In New York, meetings surrounded him like ancient walls, but no meeting could erase her face from his mind. Every coffee he drank, every shop window he passed, reminded him of Isabela. On the second night, he opened his notebook and wrote, "It's not about remembering, it's about recognizing with the heart." Meanwhile, Isabela followed her routine, pretending everything was normal. But each time she heard the bell at the door ring, she hoped it was him, back early. The nights were colder without their shared silences. She tried to distract herself with books, tea, and journaling, but loving someone who is absent always leaves a nameless space behind. On his last night in the city, Nathan went to Central Park alone. He carried the book of letters in his pocket and a quiet urgency in his chest. He sat on a bench and finally opened the envelope from Ava. He read the old words with today's eyes and understood. The man who had written those letters no longer existed. He had loved Ava once. It had been real, but the love he felt for Isabela was different, calmer, more whole. There was no illusion, no need to be someone he wasn't. With her, he was imperfect, broken, and loved just as he was, and for that, he chose to stay. Back in Seattle, he arrived on a rainy afternoon. He went straight to the bookstore without calling ahead. When he walked in, the bell rang, just like the first time. Isabela looked up and held her breath when she saw him. He carried the look of someone who had made a decision. "I came back because I realized my life is here," he said firmly, "not because of the place, but because you're here." She walked toward him slowly, her eyes full of questions and hope. "Are you sure, Nathan?" "More than ever." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and handed it to her. Inside was the note that read, "You are my most beautiful memory." "Isabela," read it through teary eyes, holding the paper like it was sacred. "You remember?" "No, but I know, and that's enough for me." She hugged him tightly, finally allowing the pain to leave her body. There, between shelves and warm yellow lights, their love stood as a living promise. It wasn't idealized love. It was built, rebuilt, and resilient. And now fully owned with all the truth it carried. Isabela smiled through tears. "Welcome back." That weekend, Nathan invited her on a surprise trip. They went to a cabin by the lake, where peace came in silence and sky. They spent the days in conversation, quiet embraces, and long gazes. On the last night, he pulled a small ring from his pocket. "This isn't a proposal. It's a symbol that I choose you every single day." Isabela took the ring with trembling hands. "I choose you too," she said without hesitation. And there, without ceremony or audience, they promised to love as they knew how, with flaws, with courage, with everything they had learned about each other. It was a bond no memory could undo. Back in the city, they resumed their lives with renewed breath. The bookstore gained a new section, hand-picked love stories, curated by Nathan. He started writing letters to Isabela, even though he saw her every day. She read each one as if it were the first, storing them in a blue box. For them, love had become ritual, choice, and destiny. One day, while organizing the poetry section, Isabela found an envelope. Inside, a short piece signed by Nathan. "Even before I knew your name, my heart was searching for you. Now that I've found you, I never want to be lost again." She took a deep breath, feeling both the weight and the lightness of all they had lived, and she knew with certainty they were exactly where they were meant to be. Months later, they traveled together to the Oregon coast. Isabela watched Nathan's walk along the beach, lighter, more whole. She thought of everything they had faced, fear, loss, reunion, and understood that true love doesn't need to be remembered. It rebuilds itself, reaffirms itself, reinvents itself. That night, sitting by the ocean, she asked, "If you could remember everything, would you go back and change anything?" Nathan shook his head with a serene smile. "No, because even forgetting, I found you, and that's the only thing I want to remember forever." And so their story came to an end, or maybe to a new beginning. Between lost memories and rediscovered feelings, they had triumphed. Because true love doesn't fade with time or forgetfulness. It endures, it blossoms, and it chooses. and Nathan chose Isabela. Once, twice, 1,000 times more. If this story touched your heart, like this video, it helps this love reach even more hearts. Share it with someone who believes love can begin again, even after loss. Subscribe to the channel to hear more stories like this, where time, pain, and even forgetfulness are no match for true love, because here stories heal, inspire, and help us believe again.